Paul, it is awesome to pick up the conversation again. That is nice. It is nice that you decide to get dressed up for this occasion while I'm sitting here in a Cobra Kai t-shirt and you're like half golf attire, half I'm getting ready to go present and I've got a jacket on. And I'm imagining that you're probably just there like in your boxer shorts or your gym shorts or something like that. Or maybe
you nailed
getting
it.
ready to go.
You actually nailed it. Well, they're not gym shorts. They are. My wife got me these sweet, like, I don't even know what type of fabric are. They're like air, but you put them on and you don't feel like you're wearing anything, and they're just really super comfortable. But they're kind of dress shorts, kind of athletic shorts. I love them. But yeah, you're right. So put that picture in your head. I decided I hadn't shaved down here this morning, so I was going to put a jacket on.
All right. You usually start each of your podcasts off with a question. So I'm going to ask you the same question. What is sales?
That's awesome. I do start mine with that. I define it as three things. I think it's leadership, number one. So I think because we need to build self-leadership in sales, but we're understanding and then leading somebody towards a vision that they want to achieve. Number two is service. And I think that's really big because we need to help people get what they need, not necessarily what they want, but what they need to achieve that vision, even though if they don't know they need it. And then the third, I use the word wayfinding, which is really finding a path to do those things together. Right. So I'm a big believer in salespeople need to be strong self-leaders and servant leaders, and then have to be very, very good at connecting the dots, right? Because that's what we do. We help people get from place A to place B.
Really like this idea of wayfinding, the kind of navigation. Like there's this navigation that comes together, and in order to navigate effectively, we've got to take signals from multiple places, and sometimes operate where we can't see some of those signals.
Do you know? I forgot to ask. Do you have any daughters?
I do not. I've got two boys. They'll be 18 and 21 here in the next couple of weeks.
Gotcha. Well, I have a 15-year-old boy, and I have a 13-year-old daughter and 11-year-old daughter. You know where I got wayfinding from? Moana. Moana. Awesome. I'm driving home from preschool with my daughters, and we're singing Moana at the top of our lungs. Moana, Moana. Then it finally hit me, like there's a guy that's out there wayfinding with his hands to the stars. It's like, that's what we do. We figure out paths. So that's how I found wayfinding.
So what are some of the mistakes we make when it comes to wayfinding, either as sales leaders, as sales professionals?
I think the biggest mistake we make is that we believe we know the path without involving the things that are around us.
Yeah.
So we get a map, and that map always points us from, we're always sailing from Hawaii to Florida, right? And so I don't even know if you can do that, but we're always sailing that same route, and we always do it the exact same way. When truthfully, you need to test the wind, you need to look at the water, you need the currents, all that stuff. You really need to understand that the map and how we get there we can have a methodology and process that helps guide us, but it's going to change every time.
So last time I checked, the world is round.
Yes.
So unless you're a flat earther, I think you can figure out a way to get from Hawaii to Florida. I don't know.
We got to crawl under it, holding onto the roots, right? That's how we really get there. Is that University of Arizona education that's coming back to me, right, Mike?
Yes, that is awesome. So the other thing Paul and I realized about each other when we met a couple of weeks back. So, and I got introduced to Paul when I was listening to his podcast, and the podcast is sponsored by Membrane. What's the name of the podcast?
It's called The Art and Science of Complex Sales.
So you can imagine, for those of you who've been around me a long time, it's almost like Paul is speaking my language. Complex sales, combination of art, a little bit of science. Some people would say that I go a little bit overboard on the science side of things, but talk about a perfect podcast name. And I heard you talk, I think you were talking with Jocko, and you had 2 different episodes with him. Yeah. And then I reached out to you and said, hey, I would love to be on the podcast. We chatted, and then we got into the whole ASU U of A thing. And I usually don't even say that U of A word out loud, because of this deep hatred I have for Tucson and all of that kind of stuff. But it's good. It's good to we can come together. We can come
We
together on
can.
common ground that
We
sales
can.
is combination of art and science, especially
It
when you're
is.
dealing with complex sales.
Absolutely. And yeah, for as much as I can't stand ASU, I love Phoenix. I love I have a lot of family in Glendale
Okay.
area. And I remember, I mean, some of the best memories actually I have of being in Tucson are the rivalry games. Like I just absolutely loved, and it was at the end of the day, you lived or died by who won in basketball. But you really, if you go back and look at the experience, it's not gonna the experience itself and the intensity of that rivalry was really the thing that made it cool, right? It's just that
My favorite basketball score was when it was 70-7. Wait, that wasn't a basketball game. That was a football game.
that was a football game. That was a football
Oh,
game. Yeah, oops.
the rivalry goes deep, and I think one of the cool things about this is we can come together around sports. You on the basketball side, me more on the football side. We can come together around schools. We can come together around sales process. And what we find is everybody's got a load of opinions, but that doesn't mean that their opinion's right. It also doesn't mean that their opinion's wrong or that their work won't work. So let's bring that back into the sales discussion. Like,
Yeah.
what are some of the big challenges that people make, specifically when it comes to wayfinding, when they try to take a playbook that they've learned at Oracle? Or I shouldn't name drop, but Oracle's a big company out there. You get a lot of enterprise sales reps or sales leaders that move into startups from a company like Oracle or a company like Salesforce. What are some of the mistakes that people make when they try to take that playbook and use it as a way to wayfind inside another organization?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So to answer it, I'm going to dive a little bit on this.
Go.
So I started my career in sales. Well, I started in the ancient days, like 2003, but I started in software sales, and I about 4 years after that, we started our own sales as a service company. So we'd hire, train, and manage teams for other organizations, and we did that in 2007. So right at the easiest time in the world to do business, right? So but one of the cool things that I learned is that there are elements of process and activity and things that you can take away, and apply to. I mean, we worked with mom and pop shops all the way up to like the leading research and development firm in the world, right?
Cool. Yep.
And there were elements of it that I could take and that I could apply, right? So I could apply the fact that I need distinct KPIs to help my salespeople. I need to have a stepwise process that it helps me logically understand where I am and where I'm going to be. I need to have people that are leaders and independently minded to really make a difference, and that so I don't have to micromanage. They can hold themselves accountable, right? And all of those pieces are critical to all levels of selling. The thing that making that what I find is that people make the mistake of, and I've made the mistake. I've seen lots of VC backed companies make this mistake where they're like, well, guess what? I ran this exact same playbook over here. It worked. All you got to do is you got to throw, we're going to spend $1 million on our team. We're going to put in, 7 SDRs, and we're going to get 3 AEs, and it's all the ratios work. And all we got to do is have the number of conversations that drive the funnel, and AEs, all they got to do is close. If the sale is different, like if you're selling a different product, customers generally don't react to it the same way, right? So there's a lot of people I've seen take one call closes into a complex sale, and they can't do it. They're like, they can't understand why their old paradigm doesn't shift into the new one. So it's just the biggest mistake is closing your eyes while wayfinding. Essentially, it's closing my eyes and relying on the past instead of relying on what can move me forward. And that's really hard for people that have a successful past. It's incredibly hard to do. Like, you're in this paradigm, like, oh, my way is the best way. there could be 3 or 4 elements of your way that really tie in and really maximize that company, but I guarantee you not all of your elements will. Does that make sense?
It does. And I really like the focus on elements. Like there are these components, these pieces that have to be true. The question is how those elements start interacting with each other and what portion of those elements and maybe what elements weigh more than the others or get applied more than the others, depending on the type of motion that you're working on, the makeup of the team, the product that you're delivering, the type of customer that you're engaged with, the go-to-market framework that you're using around, are we looking at more of a land and expand type model, or are we talking about things that are a bit more transactional where customers may be customers again at some point in time, but it's not a recurring revenue model where there's some growth built in. So I think this is the cool part about the conversation is the fundamental elements remain the same. The application of those elements starts to change. And this is where you get that kind of, you start to bridge the gap between the science side and the art side of this game that we're all fortunate to play in and be a part of. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think there's some really cool, like, you can tell when the model's wrong. I've started to notice because there's some initial art things that start to happen. Like if we go art to soft skills, emotional, EQ, like you start to find people that are frustrated, both on the customer side and on the rep side, right? Yeah. So if you're applying old playbooks to new times, and then you find a bunch of people getting highly frustrated by it, then there's some change. But you also have the numbers side of it, right? So the numbers side, and that's the really critical idea that we agree on, is how do you set down at least the playbook that you're most comfortable with, right? A playbook. Yeah. How do you put that and then measure the success of it while understanding the engagement and frustration levels, the engagement, the commitment of your team? I think both of those tie together, and you have to be looking. I don't think you can dismiss either when you're putting in a new playbook. You have to listen to both. I've made the mistake in my life of favoring one over the other a couple of times, right? I had the opportunity to lead a lot of sales teams, but if you don't take both into consideration, you're going to miss the mark.
And I think this gets into one of those other key areas that you had focused on, which is service, where you look at sales as an act of service. You're serving not only your customers, you're also serving the people inside the organization. Because without revenue, unless you're on the constant overfunding train, which it seems like, depending on what you're reading, things are drying up, things are going back to normal, whatever way you want to look at it. But if you're in a business where you're focusing on keeping the business going through revenue that you generate based on your ability to deliver a solution to a customer, you now have 2 core customers that you're serving. You have your customers that you're serving inside your organization, where if you don't generate that revenue, they won't be able to stay employed inside the job, because we won't be able to afford to keep them there. And then we have our customers that we're serving outside of the organization, which are the ones who actually pay us so that we get to the point where we can keep the people inside the organization. So there's this act of service. It's not about you, it's about others. Can you go a bit deeper on that?
I think that's a great point. So let's start internal.
Yep.
Right. So internal, one of the things I think is super, super important, especially with a sales team and a sales culture, is that I truly believe you should never hear a complaint from the sales team about the delivery team. You may hear constructive criticism. You maybe should hear coming with solutions. You maybe should hear those type of things. But if the whining and complaining does nothing, right? Because it just kills a culture. Because I've seen cultures, been in them where you have a whole segment of the business that their whole idea of interacting with another segment is to whine about them and to toss deals over on both sides, right? And this happens if you look at revenue in terms of marketing, sales, and customer support. a lot of times you will find those silos and treat it as silos, and they just toss things over the fence, and then they cry about the fact that it hasn't been delivered to them perfectly, or it wasn't sold perfectly, or is overpromised, or that the leads were shitty or the leads were great, right? You start to find these silos.
Yep.
And that is like the opposite of serving, right? It becomes the complaining. In my mind, complaining is the opposite of serving. So if you're going to, that's one of the things where I think sales is, and that self-leadership is so critical, is that you can stand up, raise your hand and say, I can offer you some constructive feedback to bring people together, right? So internally, because there's a huge commitment, you have to, and that's why I tell people to never sell for an organization you don't like, if you don't have to. Like, I mean, it's just the truth. I think a salesperson has to be courageous enough to stand up and say, I don't like being here, it's time to go, right? Because then you can never truly serve your internal people very well. You're only in it for yourself. And then on the customer side, right, this really hit me when I in 2018, a good friend of mine named James Rories, we talked a whole lot about the concept of servant leadership in sales. And he's a great dude. He's got Florist Group as his company, but it helped me really formalize my opinion on this, in that if we are not lifting up our customer and not really helping them experientially, and helping them, and when I say by serve, it's by helping them get what they need and having the courage to do that, not necessarily the exact thing that they want, which means I have to stand up, I have to be confident, I have to lead myself, so therefore I can lead them. If I'm not doing that, then I'm not doing my job, because all that comes off to the other person is commission breath. You're in it for the money, you're in it for yourself, you're in it for. So to dive deep onto that, I think is really, really important. So, and it takes some self-reflection. What is the reason I'm in this business? So that's why I think of service in the thing. I think sales is one of the most amazing professions that you can get into, because you get the opportunity to give of yourself and not have necessarily expect anything in return. But guess what? If you do it well, you will get rewarded.
So you get identified as someone who helps people solve problems. And
yes.
Once you're identified as a problem solver, not necessarily the person that does the work, but you could be a connector of others. You have access to a network of people who are really good at doing certain things, and you listen to the challenges that people are working with, and you connect the dots. So that's one act of service. You might be in a situation where you can actually solve their problem or help them see stuff that is inside their blind spots that they may not be aware of, and help them actually realize that the problem that they're focused on is a symptom of something else that's happening inside the organization. When you open yourself up and take a servant oriented approach, servant driven approach to leading both internal and external customers, it's amazing what opens up. And the key is, it's not about you. It's not about self. It's about others. And the only way that you can really help others is if you start asking some deep questions, and you listen, and you know what questions to ask, and do all of those things. And I think the piece that you highlighted around working inside organizations that you believe in is super important. Like, work inside an organization that solves the problem that you're interested in solving. Don't go in there because, hey, I see an opportunity inside the market and I think I can make a bit of cash here. Like, that's a quick road to doing things to others, not on behalf of others or for others.
Yeah, and I'm interested in your experience on this. Like, because I've found that it's not necessarily the problem that I don't necessarily have to go to an industry that has the problem that I'm incredibly interested in solving, right? If I'm a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
But what I need to do is I need to change my mindset to be able to, but if I get a job with, say, pick any ERP, SAP, right? I better be start to become really interested and self-motivated to understand the problems that people are having because of poor ERP systems, so I can actually help, right? Because So it's changing that mindset of, I once had this role play, and this is a stupid example, but I had a role play that really highlighted this to me when I was back at my sales and service business. I was talking to somebody about, it was just a stupid role play, but I still remember it. It sticks in my head. Blueberry picking.
Okay.
Right. We were talking about, we made up this stupid role play about selling to people that did blueberry picking.
Okay.
Right. Because I found that the most inane thing in the world. And I had one person come up and they asked me like 2 questions, and it was a terrible role play. I had somebody else come up and they had spent, 10 minutes getting interested about the intricacies of blueberry picking. Right. And they started talking about, okay, here's a rake. What type of rake do you use? Right. Where are you located? Are you in Maine? They looked at a Wikipedia page for crying out loud. But the thing was, they took a second to get interested in what I was interested in and the problems I was having. So they were able to serve. So changing that mindset to one that, yes, you can't control that, is critical, right? I think it's absolutely critical to becoming good in an industry, or good at applying your tools of the trade and sales to a particular industry.
Yeah, I think there's a curiosity that comes along with being interested in solving for a specific problem, or being passionate about it. Like, so for me, a couple of things I'm interested in. I'm interested in playing golf. I'm interested in driving a Jeep around. I'm interested in improving or how people look at things like achieving results, or goal setting and execution through clarity and focus, building out systems, process, all of this kind of stuff. I like breaking things apart and then putting them back together, deconstructing things and then putting them back together. And some of this comes from playing with Legos or a Erector set or Lincoln Logs as a kid, but like all of those kind of things. So those are the kind of things that I'm broadly interested in. If someone came to me and said, hey, I really would like you to sell cars, as an example, and that car was, a Ferrari or a Porsche or a car that goes really fast and doesn't climb over things. It's probably not the best fit for me. Could I do it? Sure. Could I fake it? Absolutely. Could I get myself into a situation where I'm like, okay, well, let's focus on the problem from the perspective of the customer. Let's ask some questions, pull that information out. Yes, I could do it because I'm curious. I'm interested in learning about other people. I like asking questions. When I ask questions, I get information. I learn a little bit more. I can go a little bit deeper. So that's okay. But where's the best place for me to be? Well, it's to go and maybe sell Jeeps, if that was it. But it's not, even there, I don't really want to sell cars. That's not my thing. For me, I'm more interested in emerging tech, the bleeding edge type stuff that enables humans to do better human things. So emerging tech that meets this cross section of enablement technology. So when you pull those two together, that's like my sweet spot, because I think that if we can give humans better tools to do things, tools, process, thinking, whatever, they'll get better at doing the work that they're doing. They'll be able to do more fulfilling work and they'll live better lives. So for me, that's how I can focus and kind of niche down. The challenge so in the conversation that we're having around here, like even like in the blueberry picking kind of scenario, yes, you can help people generate a level of curiosity around that. But I think there's a better way to do it, which is, like when you get into things like target account planning, the question I like to ask is, who are some of the companies that you're super interested in? What products do you buy? What's in, what phone are you using? What car are you driving? Where are you going on vacation? Like all of those kind of things. Even if those companies are not part of our ideal customer profile, I want them to do research into those companies because they're deeply interested in the company and they can learn those elements around research and then apply them to transfer those skills into someplace else. So that's how I look at that.
That is a great exercise. I think, yes, absolutely. I can see why that would be really effective.
And so that's where, and the reason I shared it was you had asked, you said, hey, what's your opinion on this thing? So that's how I look at it. So just a slightly different one. There was the opinion around the importance of being focused on the problem, or really being interested in the problem. I think on that side, you can find problems that you're really deeply, you can find organizations who solve for the problems that you're deeply interested in solving for. What you might find out is you can't make any money there, or you may
Yes.
not be able to, you may not be able to make the kind of money that you want to make or could make in some other areas. So then the next question I would say is, okay, well, who are some of the companies that serve those companies that solve for the problem that you solve for, and how do you enable them? And, like, so that they come together, because once you're there, then you can really start to empathize with others. You can put yourself in the shoes of others as you go through it. So
I'm sitting here in the back of my mind. I think you're making great points, and I don't know why it keeps on coming up in the back of my mind, but I want to know what kind of Jeep you like to drive.
yeah, it's not even what I drive. I've got a 2011 Rubicon, and
Okay.
it's a 4-door. I'd wanted a Jeep forever, and then once Jeep came out with the 4-door ones, then it was like, okay, well, we can get a Jeep that'll work for the family. And now I kick myself for not having a 2-door, because I want something with a shorter wheelbase. But I spend more time playing golf than I do off road. But yeah, it's a 2011 Rubicon. It's got it's built to crawl over things.
Well, shout out to my buddy Jeff, who lives in your neck of the woods. We used to go. It was one of my favorite things to do when we would. He had an old CJ7,
Okay, yeah.
and we would go off roading in that out in the desert. It was literally pull. I love the fact that we could literally pull off a road, just go drive in the desert, and it was so much fun.
And it's getting harder to do that now with like Bureau of Land Management and people putting up fences and all of that other kind of stuff. But there's still places out here in Arizona where you can do that. You can just kind of go out in the middle of nowhere, lose yourself for a couple of hours, have no cell phone service, make sure you bring a lot of water and some recovery gear so that you can get yourself out of a situation. But yeah, so when you make it out this way, we'll have to get the Jeep out and go climb some stuff. Let's talk
That
about
would
the
be great.
leadership piece. So
Yeah.
the first one that you talked about was leadership, and now we'll
Yeah.
kind of go into that piece. So how do you define leadership?
As I dive in sales, I define it as helping somebody achieve a vision.
Okay.
Because at its heart, I think leadership is a visionary exercise, because you're moving from A to B, and you're helping people do that. So you need to be able to see it, and then you need to be able to guide a team to it. I think there's a lot of components parts to it, which is why I love the concept so much, because I believe discipline is one of the hugest parts of leadership, which is it's your own self leadership. So I would actually say self leadership is the critical part of other people leadership. And so no, that's really how I do it. So to be able to define a vision, I need to be able to keep the habits that will keep me strong enough that I can actually go after and achieve that vision while taking the path to get there, and then bring others along with me.
Very cool. Why do you think people struggle with leadership?
Yes.
Why?
I think it goes back. Well, I can only speak to myself.
Sure.
Right. So let me speak to myself, which is the times when I struggle with leadership of others is the exact same times when I'm struggling with leadership of self, which I'm not asking the same questions of myself. I'm not doing the same things of myself that I'm asking others to do. I'm losing habits. I'm losing discipline. I'm not, when I do it well, I'm able to, all of that stuff kind of takes care of itself. I just have my I am doings, right? Instead of my should do or need to or have tos. I just, what I'm doing, that gets pushed to the side because I know it's healthy, it's good, I'm building myself. And then I can focus truly on the needs of others. So service, and then driving us towards that vision. So when I get off track, if I get off track for a couple of weeks, I feel it. And I think I'm a terrible leader. When I'm on track, when I'm doing it well, it's like, it just clicks. And so, and because it becomes about not how others perceive you, but just about the things that you know that you're doing for them. Does that make any sense? I kind
It
of
does.
rambled a bit, but
Yeah, it does. One of the things that's jumping out at me, and it's cool to hear you say it, is the whole idea of, if I'm not taking care of self, how have I earned the right? How can I be there to serve others. And it gets into this whole, we all see it whenever we fly, or hear it whenever we fly. Make sure if you're traveling with someone younger, make sure you put your oxygen mask on first. You've got to take care of self, or you won't be in a position to be there for others. And I really like that focus. And what I also like that came out of that part of the discussion is the key on discipline, which starts to get into some of these stoic virtues, right? Like, what's my level of discipline? How am I holding myself personally accountable to do the thing that I need to, and how am I designing for that level of success? So I think it makes a lot of sense. It seems so obvious, though. It seems like there are people out there listening like, guys, duh, no kidding. Yet, I think we both agree people still struggle with it. They still struggle with this stuff. It's simple to say, maybe hard to do, might be one of those things. So when things get hard and you've got to get yourself back on track, what's your process for getting back on track?
Great. That's another great question. So, for example, I'll just take you through a recent now moment, right? Things have been hard for me the past week. The reason that they've been hard is I stepped in a hole while mowing my parents' lawn, which I love to do. It actually is one of the things that I truly enjoy. I get to go over, be with them and put a lawn, but I stepped in a hole, my back went out, right? And I'm immediately in this new paradigm. I'm gone. I'm out of this paradigm where I was working out, working good hours, working out, spending time with my family, to I'm either standing or laying on my back with muscle relaxers. And I'm looking at my workout board over here, and it's completely blank. The one thing that I've learned is that you just need to get back. You just need to, at the right time, and sometimes it's not always the right time for you to get back, right? Sometimes you need to be patient and let the back heal. So I hate that. So instead of thinking, oh my God, I'm out of rhythm, the world's going to shit, I usually do that for 2 to 3, 4 days. And then I have this, which I don't even know why I do it for 2 to 3 to 4 days anymore, but I do because I'm a human. And then I realize, oh my God, okay, now what do I just need to change something. I just need to take that one step to getting back on track. So I'm going to wake up, I'm going to get my 6:30 in. We're going to do that, whether it's a 6:30 cup of coffee instead of a run. We're going to do it. And then we're going to go on to the next steps. So, because if I find myself missing that 6:30, sleeping in till 8, 7, 8, 10, 12 days in a row, what becomes my new habit? It's horrible. So it's just taking the one step. And then if you take the one step, you can take the second one. I think it goes from realization that you're off track to a willful decision to take a step back towards being on track, and then make that decision again and again and again.
Yeah. There's a piece in there that you said and didn't focus on, but that I think is really important, is that opportunity to reflect, that chance to pause and look in the mirror and look at things. And I'm thinking about, in the context of the discussion from from Hawaii to Florida, I could have had you just turn around and you could have looked at the map behind you that would have gotten you from showing you the two routes that you could have taken from, either of them might have been more or less uncomfortable, but there are a couple of routes that you could have gone on a boat type thing. There are times where we get so deep into the work that we're doing, so deep into the stress, that we forget to pause, ask ourselves a question, start to reflect on some things, gain some additional perspective, get that nudge to look at things a little bit differently, and also be really reflective around the idea of what's really changed, like how much has changed. So yeah, you stepped in a hole and you threw your back out, or you threw your hips out, you got yourself into a situation where now you've got a lot of pain. Okay, cool. the rest of the world didn't end. Like there's a bunch of others, all that other stuff is going to continue to go on and it will continue to persist. Let's get this thing fixed and then move on to the next. So in the spirit of helping you from a wayfinding perspective and navigation and serving a little bit, one of my favorite people to follow around this kind of stuff is a guy by the name of Kelly Starrett. Okay. And Kelly has a book out there, Becoming a Supple Leopard. He's also got a YouTube channel and does a bunch of stuff.
Wait a second. Becoming a Supple Leopard?
Becoming a Supple Leopard. And I think it's version 2.0 is the version that's out there. And
all right, Kelly, if you're listening, that is an awesome title.
He is, I've never met him. I've never spoken with him directly. Okay. I've gotten pretty deep into his stuff up to the point where if the kids come back, and I say kids and they're still, like I said, we're going to be 18 and 21 here pretty quick. But if they are not as open as they could be about some injuries that they have, because I will go after them with either a lacrosse ball, a set of compression tape, and we'll work through some of those things. But take a look at Kelly's stuff. One of the things that can create that challenge that you're talking about where the back hurts, and what happens with me is my hips get out of whack, and they'll get out of whack either because I fall down a pair of step down a little bit too quickly, or if I'm out on the golf course I step in a hole, or any number of reasons that come up with me being a klutz, and it'll throw things out. My hips will get out of whack. So sometimes I have to go to the PT. I've got a PT in the neighborhood. His name's Mike. I call him PT Jesus, which is absolutely hilarious. He's an Iowa guy, and he will work on things like my hip flexor. So sometimes you just have to get somebody else to go in there and really do some deep work. But beyond that, there's an exercise that you can do where if you're laying on your back, and again, I am not a PT. I've read a couple of books and I've done a lot of self-work, but the exercise that I get into is mine ends up being on my left side. So if I put my left leg above my right leg and create tension going down with my left leg and try to lift my right leg up, it'll start to loosen up my hips and get those hips back into place. But take a look at Kelly's stuff and you'll see some different exercises that he does around the same idea around how do you get those hips back into place. It's amazing what it'll do from a relief standpoint when it comes to the back. Awesome. So the wayfinding is pointing Paul out to a resource who knows how to solve for this problem. Amen. The service is sharing a little bit of knowledge around personal experience there. And the leadership hopefully is a little bit of, you got to get out there and you got to test some things and realize that even in the worst of times, things aren't that bad. You'll get through them. And I really like the piece that you talked about is just getting back on track and taking one step at a time and starting to build those streaks up and not expecting that you've got to do a giant leap right out of the gate.
You said something there that I'm going to add one more thing to my previous discussion.
Sure.
Which is, sometimes you can't take that step alone, or you don't have the will to take that step alone, right? And so having that coach or trusted advisor, or in my case, it's my wife that says, honey, I love you, but you got to get your ass moving. I recognize that I am not strong enough to do all of those things on my own. And so that is one of the things that has helped me immensely, which is having somebody, and I go to different people in different situations, right? But having somebody that knows me, that's willing to tell me the truth and says exactly what you said. Like I could get overwhelmed by this picture behind me and say, oh my God, how many different ways are there to get from to Hawaii to fly? Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? It's going to take me so long. It's going to take me so long. And you know what usually happens is one of the coaches comes along and smacks me on the back of the head and says, hey, you're never going to get there without doing one thing. So just start, put up the sail, it's like, oh shit. Yeah, I can do that. I can do that,
yes,
and
yep.
And that's what gets you back. At least that's what gets me back. Gets me back to being able to a spot where I'm comfortably leading self. Therefore I can lead others.
Yeah. Well, and when you start taking that step, then you've actually got something you can assess against. You can assess progress based on that step. Did you get closer to the goal or are you further away from the goal? because a lot of time when you're moving, it's rare that you're just going to move in place, unless you're operating on a treadmill. And I guess it could happen, but you did this step get you closer or further away. Then you can evaluate, you can assess. And Colonel Boyd talks about this and nails this. I would say nails this. That sounds like yeah, good job, Colonel Boyd. If you're familiar with the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. This is John Boyd's thing around accelerating decision making. And when in a competitive environment, specifically in dogfighting, and where he used this was you want to enter into your adversary or your opponent's loop. And Dave Burke, excuse me, was on the podcast a number of episodes ago, and we talked about the OODA loop, and we'll include a link here for it. But once you observe something, then you orient yourself relative to it, you make a decision, you take action, then you go right back to observing again, orienting, deciding, and taking action. And it's just one step at a time as you move forward. If you get caught up in reading Kelly's stuff or watching the videos, but don't do any of the work, I can tell you one thing, your back isn't going to get any better. It's just, and you won't know what works. You'll have a bunch of theories and a bunch of ideas around what could work or how it could work, but you won't really know what works until you actually get out there and act. And to the point that you made there, Paul, that I think is critical, it's hard to act alone. You feel uncomfortable, you don't feel safe, you feel there's this uncertainty, there's this doubt, there's the what if I do this, or what, all of this other stuff that could happen around it. And sometimes you just need that little nudge. And that's why it's good to have good community, good resources, people that you can lean on. I think I want to go a little bit deeper into this. I think this is one of the biggest challenges that exists within leadership roles inside revenue, or any kind of leadership roles. But my experience is on the revenue side. It's any revenue related leadership roles. People move in to these roles and they don't know where to ask for help, and they feel less than if they do ask for help, and they don't want to be found out, so they don't ask for help. And I think that creates not only problems for themselves, but also creates some really big problems for their teams. Do you agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I'll take it a step further, which is, so back all the way to our initial map, right? When we were talking about coming into a company, you have an Oracle, great success at Oracle, you're a sales leader there, you come into a startup company, and 50% of your first year is gone, and you're at 10% of revenue, right?
Yeah.
And I have seen it. I've seen people that navigate that really well, and I've seen people that navigate that atrociously. The ones that have navigated it well have been the ones that have done a couple things. One, they've been able to set a revenue, I call it a revenue framework that is understood from the CEO on down.
Yep.
And then they're able to ask for help and adjust as needed when things aren't working. Right. So they raise their hand and they say, holy crap, I thought we were going to be at 90% of plan by now, but we're at 17 or whatever it may be. Right. Where do you think we should adjust? I need some help. And then they go out and seek that proactively. The ones that have not done well that I've seen, they can even have the revenue framework up top, but they're the ones that just keep demanding that happen and continue to happen because they're relying only on the old paradigm, not the new method of, I think my dog just barked, but not on the new method of let's find something that does work and add it, change what we know to add. And you usually need an outside perspective to make that happen. If you just sit in your own head and try and figure it out, I know it's a lonely place. I've been there. It's a very lonely place. It sucks.
So let's break the revenue framework piece down a bit more. What is a revenue framework?
The way I think of a revenue framework is it's an easy way to describe how we're going to drive business to hit a number. So that framework should include things all the way from how we are going to drive net new leads, to how we're going to act on those new leads, to a process for how we're going to sell, to how we're going to gain and increase customer satisfaction. And I need to have that mapped right? I need to have that mapped across and discussed. Maybe you could call it a revenue strategy, but I like the word framework because it puts in pieces, parts, and I drop in components. You can drop in each component from point, point one all the way to point six, right? And you can, and then you need to have processes within each area. So we're talking about the science of sales that can tell us, are we being effective in that area? Now, if you don't do something like that and have a broader revenue framework relative to your lines of business, the challenge becomes you start to not know where things break down, and it becomes a mystery. And you don't know how to change within that. So, for example, I break it down to having an overall revenue framework. And within that revenue framework, I have what I call, we have marketing and sales methodologies.
Yep.
Right. My sales methodology is the conversation mechanism that I use to train, and all the training and learning that my salespeople take in. And then I have a process by which they execute that methodology. So at that level, I can say, great, we're using, and I'll just take names out of that. We're using Sandler as our sales methodology. We're using this process, and we're going to get this. Because of marketing's methodology, they're up here. I can expect, 15 leads a month or whatever it may be. This is how we're going to act on them. And you know exactly where the bottlenecks are coming in. If I look at it any different, I personally start to struggle. And then I start to make stuff up. And I do. It's like, oh yeah, I think we should do this to do this. And I think instead of innovating, make stuff up, right? Like you can innovate when you have a good framework that you study. You can truly take an idea and make it much better. If you don't have that starting point, you're just starting to throw shit at a wall. Excuse my French, but
no, yeah, you're right. Well, so we get into these challenges inside our organization where sometimes we match frameworks against frameworks, or methods against methods, or processes against processes. And in a lot of cases, we're talking about the same thing, but we're using different words to do it. And we get so beholden to the word, or the vocabulary, like my word is better than your word. And we lose sight of the specific problem that we're looking to solve. And we get into this challenge of, now we have mysteries that exist where we make things up to inform our own opinions and reinforce our own beliefs. And I think this is where that piece around art and science comes together. When you apply the scientific method to assessing individual challenges that you have going on inside your organization, you can at least start to identify what hypotheses are real and what are not. And now we've got some data to support the things rather than emotion and feelings.
Yeah, and let's take one of those words, right? Let's take this word that I actually was a part of. I was a part of making it popular. I think, at least I'll give myself some credit, I'll pat myself on the back, but cool. Early on with this idea of a marketing qualified lead, right? Okay. We when my previous business, we dove in full bore into lead scoring and marketing qualified leads. And I was a contributor to Act On and all these things. And I got big into the content marketing and marketing qualified leads. The reality of the world, though, at that time, and still is that is such a nebulous term that you end up having these wars within organizations about what an MQL is. Yeah. Right. Oh, you gave me 42 MQLs and you guys did nothing with them. I don't even know where those came from. Like, what do you know? And so it's such a hugely, terribly nebulous word that unless you have, and this is one of the things I am really working on right now within my own organization is I really want that complete transparency. So we know what it is, where it's come from, how we should react, and that. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it's actually a really hard thing to do. It seems like it should be simple, but it's a really hard thing to do. But unless you get those words defined real well, you always get that idea of somebody's failing, because you always have this idea that you can blame. right? I can blame the other part of the marketing is just not giving me enough MQLs. Well, I gave you 60 MQLs. Well, no, those were just high lead scores. I mean, like, does that make sense?
It does. I think the takeaway. So if you're in an organization, you're listening to this, and you're going through this process, and you're saying, "I'm struggling with this thing that Paul is describing." Make sure you take some time and ask some of those questions, like, "What does this mean?" When you have that acronym in front of you, MQL. What is our definition? Don't use somebody else's definition. What's our definition that we agree to? From both a marketing perspective, let's use your broader team terms that are used in organizations, a marketing, sales, and success perspective. Let's get everybody involved. And if you've got RevOps, make sure they're part of the discussion. And sometimes they're going to be putting things together. If you've got go-to-market and you've got product, like everybody gets together, let's actually align on that definition. And if you struggle with aligning on the definition, you've got bigger problems than figuring out what an MQL is and what it is not. Like so go through this process, and what will end up happening, typically happens, is people will have biases and preconceived notions and opinions about what each of these things are called, and ultimately the feedback I would give you if you're running into that challenge is reduce the number of words necessary to explain what something means. Simplify your definitions and gain alignment. And then move on to the next one, and then move on to the next one, and then move on to the next one. Don't try to do everything at once. But yeah, Paul, I think it makes a lot of sense. Where can people find out more about the kind of work you're doing?
Easy. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm Paul Fuller, FULLER on LinkedIn. I work with Membrane, so Chief Revenue Officer of Membrane, and I tell you, it's one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life. I get to lead a team of badass salespeople, marketers, and customer success team members. That's the part of the organization that I run. I think they're amazing. And I also get to run and talk to over 130 partners in market that are focused on having discussions just like the one we're having today. So I work with a sales effectiveness consultants and sales trainers across the world. And the awesome thing is that they take these ideas. So I'm really in the business of taking these ideas and turning them into a reality, taking that first step with our customers to get them onto platforms and the training and the talent that they need to actually achieve some of these dreams. So it's fantastic. I get to have the theoretical, I get to practice it in my own organization, and I get to provide sales teams with sales optimization tools that absolutely kick ass and help them put in methodologies and processes directly into their everyday so they can get better.
Yeah. And if you're looking for technology to enable your sales team to get better, look at Membrane. George and the team have put together a really, really solid product. It takes a revenue first perspective when it comes to how do we build technology to support and enable our teams to do better things. George and I first came across each other back when we were doing some stuff with Vendor Neutral a number of years ago, and Dan Silly had made the introduction. So if you know of someone who would find this conversation valuable, please share it with them. Let Paul and I know. You can tag us on LinkedIn. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?